Welcome to Project-Based Learning 101, Designing an Effective PBL Curriculum. Today's webinar is brought to you by It's Learning. My name is Annie Tyke and I work with Tech and Learning, and I'll be your moderator today. Today we'll be talking about how project-based learning supports 21st century skills with experienced educator Jeff Robin. But first, send us your questions throughout the webinar through the question tab on your screen. We'll answer questions later in the webinar, but be sure you send them as you think of them, and we'll get to as many as possible during the Q&A. By the way, you'll hear a lot of information today, so you may want to download the PDF of the slides. Under your Handouts tab, you can download the PDF, and we will also have provided you an ebook from It's Learning entitled Project-Based Learning and Student Engagement, Preparing K-12 Students for College and Workforce Success. You can find this PDF download also at the Handouts tab on your screen. So before we introduce Jeff and get to our actual presentation, we'd like to do some poll questions with you. So our first question is, what is your level of experience with project-based learning? Are you a beginner, just getting started to research, but have not implemented anything? Are you intermediate, you're relatively new to project-based learning and hoping to learn? Or are you an advanced person, at least 1 year experience implementing project-based learning? So if you could respond to this, we're going to take about 20 seconds and see if we can get a measure of where our audience is today. Then just so you know what to expect, we'll be doing 2 more questions, quick questions after this one. Okay, so we have about 5 more seconds. Okay, that poll is closed. Now while we wait for, oh, here we are. So 38% of you are beginners. Okay, that's good to know. 47% have a little bit experience but looking to learn some more, and about 15% of you are advanced users of project-based learning. Good, that's great information for us to have. So our next question is project-based learning currently part of your curriculum? Yes or no? Is project-based learning currently part of your curriculum? Yes or no? And again, we'll take about 15 more seconds, and we'll get a sense of where everyone is on this question. Okay, about 5 more seconds. Okay, so just over 50%, but roughly 50-50 in terms of whether you've already incorporated project-based learning into your curriculum. Okay, our final question this afternoon is, do you plan to include project-based learning in your curriculum within the next year? And again, this is a yes or no question. Do you plan to include project-based learning in your curriculum within the next year? About 10 more seconds. All right, and the poll will be closing just about now. Okay, great. 95% of our audience is planning on including project-based learning in their curriculum within the next year. Outstanding. Okay, well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Jeff Robin taught high school for 27 years and is a founding faculty member of High Tech High in San Diego, where he remained an active collaborative project-based learning teacher until 2017. Jeff leads project-based learning workshops around the world, is a contributing blogger for EdWeek, and remains a practicing artist. You can find him online at www.jeffrobin.com. So, Jeff, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now.
Okay. Well, thank you all for turning your computer on and coming to see what I have to say about project-based learning and why I think it's important. these images here are actually from one of our first exhibitions that we ever had about 16 years ago, and you can see the kids there and the work that they've done. And it was this was called Digital Baroque, and the students got to go out and find Baroque paintings that they were interested in and then manipulate them. And at the time, you know, Photoshop was kind of like the new thing, so the kids really took these ideas of Caravaggio and I think that's I forget which painter that is. The View of Delft. I'm getting older, and so the kids got to research and find these really attractive paintings and then change them and manipulate them in a digital way. And then we researched, and then they researched on their own. They found what was important to them. They saw how their art was related to each other. And I had been teaching art history before that, and just the kids were sitting in a row, and that was no longer an option. I didn't really enjoy that. And so when I got to project-based learning, I saw that I could still teach my subject area, but I didn't have to teach it in the same way. And that's why I thought project-based learning was so great, because it wasn't about me. It was about what the students what attracted the students to the subject, and then I was able to guide them or coach them through their learning. So it was really fun, and so that's why I switched to project-based learning, and it really made me excited to go to school every day. It made me just excited to go to work every day. It was more not of a challenge, but it was more interesting because I got to really know the kids instead of just stand in front of them. So people, a lot of times, and people said that they were intermediate or advanced project-based learning, but this might help you articulate why you do project-based learning. Essentially, each student is a peg, and they're there and they're ready to learn. And the curriculum looks like this. It's a box with holes for pegs to fit into it, and they fit in nicely. The pegs, you know, fall in and they do their homework, they study for their quizzes and their tests, they write their papers, everything's on time, and they're perfect. But what happens if you're not a peg, but you're a cube? This is my son Pablo, and he's kind of a cube. And what he found was the teacher grinded the sides of him down. All the things that he was, that made him who he was, he had to change so that he would fit neatly in this little curriculum circle. So that didn't make him very happy. It's funny, when I did this is part of one of my animations, and my mother's like, "What did you do to him? How did you hurt him?" And I'm like, "No, Mom, it's Photoshop." But I thought that was kind of funny. Students are like different shapes, and they have different ways of different ideas, different concepts, different interests, different, you know, backgrounds, and they have lots of different ways of learning. So what you really need to do is build the project so that there's lots of different entry points, so every student can get into the curriculum in their own way and then flourish from that. And so this is really student-centered learning. The idea that the project your assignment meets the students, and that becomes their project. So wherever the student's at, they're ready to get into the curriculum, and as a guide and as a project manager, you'll help all the students become successful. And a lot of this hits with 21st century skills, and you can see the project-based learning, and that's supposed to be the road to equity. And equity in the classroom is that everyone feels like, hey, I can be successful here. It's not just one kid that's really good at memorizing or another kid that's really good at drawing. I heard that all the time, but everybody can be good. Every skill is learned. And this kind of is, this is a great example of when we put plays on in schools. Some kids want to be dramaturgists, some kids want to build the set, and some kids want to act. And everybody has these predisposed ideas of what they're good at. And it's because maybe they've done it before, they feel good about it. So what we need to do as teachers, developing projects that meet these kids where their interest is, and then bring them so that they can try other things and also find what really their love of learning is. The 21st century skills are different. and they call them soft skills, but working together, working with other people is something that project-based learning is great at. I mean, it's not always smooth. I just went to my son's student-led conference yesterday, and he was telling his teachers, well, yeah, it was a little difficult because my partner wasn't really doing his work, and the teachers noticed that, and but that really taught him how to. I mean, it taught him way past the physics that he was doing, but it taught him how to work with other people and these ideas of the 21st century skills, that working with people and interacting with people is almost as important or just as important as what you actually do, because if you can't work with people, nothing gets done, and hopefully your work becomes successful. Getting started with PBL is sometimes people are very nervous about it, and what I try and tell people is do something you know. Something that I always enjoy is, that's me and my wife and my 2 kids. I never took actually a picture of us together because I was so excited when I was at the SF MoMA and I saw these great chairs, these really cool bentwood chair designs, and that's where I get my ideas from. We went to the MoMA and we saw chairs, and I thought, oh, that would be a great project to do with my students. When we went back and they in teams of 2, they designed and built bentwood chairs and lamps and wrote a book about their experience doing it. So they were really excited, and as you can see, the chairs were significantly different from each other. It was an open-ended enough assignment that they could do almost anything that they wanted. Some kids even work with metal and different materials, and this was a physics and art project. But the idea is that I got it from something that I had seen. I had gone out. A lot of times too, what inspires me is books. So I was working with an English teacher, and we were talking. She said, I want the kids to read Siddhartha. So we read Siddhartha together, and we created this new project where the students would tell the new path of the Buddha in their own stories about enlightenment. Or I did a project last year with a humanities teacher, and the students, we took the annotated Mona Lisa, which is a great art history book, and the students made their own history of art book. Looks real formal. It's a great book, and they made the art that went into it, and they wrote themselves into art history. So it's much in the same ways that we took the inspiration from going to museums or from reading books. It's things that are in our lives, and I mean, we are the experts in our fields, and to show the students like something that's interesting to us really is a great way to inspire them. But the important part is doing the project yourself first, so you can show them an exemplar and show how excited you are about the subject area. So creating a plan and project-based learning, planning and letting go. And the most important thing about planning and letting go is when I plan out a project, I go through it. I see what the pitfalls are. I see if it's relevant, if it's worthwhile, if it's going to be fun for the students to do, because I did it myself first. And then I present it to the students, and I'm able to let go. If we had a staircase to nowhere project that I'll be talking about in a minute or two, and some of the students said, we don't want to build a staircase, we want to build something else. And I was okay about letting go and letting them do what they wanted to do, because I was concerned more about if it was relevant, if it was worthwhile, and if it was fun. Not that they had to do exactly what I did. And if I hadn't done the project myself first, I would have been worried about where they were going and what they were doing. So it's important to do the project yourself first, and that's planning, doing the project, figuring out what the deliverables are going to be. And this was a drawing I made about the bentwood chair project. I made a proof model. I had a plan, I had a promotional poster, I had all the things that I wanted the students to deliver, and I made them myself to see what it was going to be like. I also very methodically plan out a calendar so the students know what we're going to do on each day. And when I first did this, it's kind of an amusing story, and it makes me look like a big baby, but I am. Um, we one day the director of the school said, "Wait, these teachers don't even have plans. We need to know what they're doing every single day." And I said, "No, we can't do that. I can't I can't put a calendar what I'm doing every day. That'll take away all my creativity. It'll take away all the spontaneity. It's it's fascism." And and then I went back to my classroom. I put on a timer and I wrote a calendar up of everything that I'm going to do that semester, how the project's going to go out. And it took me about an hour. And it was fantastic. I've been doing it ever since. It's not that I stick to the calendar, but I know what it is, and it's on the computer so I can change it. So I'm no longer nervous Sunday night before I go to school. Oh my God, what are we doing tomorrow? Every kid, every parent, and the teachers that I work with and myself knew what was happening tomorrow. So part of the management plan definitely needs to be an online calendar where maybe you just put one or two words, or maybe you put several things, but it's really important for you're a project manager. You're not necessarily like a teacher anymore. It's about really being organized. And management, the greatest thing about managing project-based learning is that that's me before I grew a beard, I guess. Because I'm not lecturing, because I'm not the center of the classroom, I'm able to go around and talk to students to find out what they're doing and if they need help. And some periods I would spend the whole period just with one group, and other times I would talk to everybody 2 or 3 times. Also talking to the students about maybe they're doing something similar to what someone else had just done, and so that they can help them. So management is being there. It's being present. It's not checking your emails. To do PBL right, you got to be walking around the classroom the whole time. I know, and it sounds like it's more work, but it is. It's just more fun work. So if you backstop all of these things, if you backstop all the deliverables, if you backstop your calendar, and you have everything ready, then you're able to plan and let go. And I think that's a really important aspect of what project-based learning is about. If you don't plan, it's going to be very, very difficult. It's in the same sense that when you're a traditional teacher just doesn't walk into the room with nothing. They have a textbook that's been developed that costs, millions of dollars, and hundreds of people worked on it, and they had to get it to the teacher in their hand, and a lot of work went into the textbook. Whether you agree with textbooks or not, it is a lot of work to produce it. And if you're going to be on your own in a classroom doing projects, you have to take the time to plan it out well. And everybody will have their own things that they do, but planning is the key to project-based learning. Now, designing a curriculum, it's kind of, it takes a while. Somebody asked me recently, when did you become a good teacher? How many years did it take? And I said, about 20 years. And that was kind of disheartening. And maybe I had some maturity issues, but designing the curriculum is something that I always redo. It's something that I'm always playing with. It's something that I have to always keep rethinking and saying, is this really important? And am I reaching the students? So with the Staircase to Nowhere project, I was working with a physics teacher, and he was also their calculus teacher as well. But the first day of class, we handed the students yardsticks, and we said, go out and define a staircase. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, go out, tell me about a staircase. Here's a yardstick. You can measure it, you can draw it, you can photograph it. And we want you to come back and tell us what did you notice about the staircase? So we didn't tell them, like, did you notice all the stairs were the same rise and run? We didn't say, how quickly did it ascend? We didn't say any of those things. We wanted the students to have reach an understanding of what a staircase is thoughtfully by going out and figuring it out on their own. Of course, physics teachers out there know that we were really doing physics. It's what do you notice in the physical world, and to write it down and to document it, to measure it, to try and explain it. And so this was their first, basically their first physics lab. But it was open-ended enough for people of lots of different skill sets and different and pre-existing knowledge to all be successful. Then they came back and they made posters about the staircases that they saw. This one's of the elementary school, and the students put in the information that was interesting to them. And then we showed them, and then the next step, and this is my scale model, my 1 to 10 scale model I made. And so all the students needed to make a 1 to 10 scale model of a staircase. And they did this by playing. They cut blocks and developed their own staircase model. Oops, wrong direction. And they also had to come up with a math poster and put all the math that they understood about their staircase, whatever they understood. And this is the one that I did, and if you look at it, it's not super duper. I never took calculus, but the kids put some really cool stuff on it. They're a little bit above my level. But here are some of the staircases that they made and the posters that they made to go along with the work that they had done. And I thought, you know, each one was different, and each student had their own take on what was interesting to them, and that's what brought them into the curriculum. That's like the box with lots of different holes. Some kids made very complex ones, and some kids made simple ones. And some students made great posters that were super advanced, absolutely at grade level, and other kids, you know, didn't, but that wasn't what was getting them into the curriculum. Participating was what was getting them into the curriculum, and then later we would backfill the information that we felt like they needed. The second stage was a 1 to 5 scale model, where they would plan this out. Instead of just making it by playing, they would work with a partner and make a 1 to 5 scale model. And of course there's some math involved in this. It's not necessarily difficult math, but it was to really measure something and make something that's exactly the way you want it to be is a trick for an adult, and it certainly is a trick for kids that maybe hadn't ever used power tools before. And they, of course, they had to make a math poster that went along with it. This one I had more help with my teaching partner, and they made different staircases. And so these two boys used fractals as a impedance for what their staircase was going to be about, and they had learned about fractals, and they used that as a kind of a motif, as a theme for their staircase that they built. And it's beautiful. It's 1 to 5, and it's relevant to them, and it's a complete piece where the math and the physics are really good. It's, you know, like, what more can you expect? And then they had to build a 1-to-1 staircase around the school, and so 10 students had to get together, design, and build a staircase somewhere in the school. So these students got together and they wanted to build a bridge across this center hallway of the school, and they had to learn about lots of different aspects of building and design. They needed a span 20 feet, and they came to me and said, hey, you know, what do we do? How do we span 20 feet? And I'm like, I don't know. And they said, well, where can we find out? I said, where do you think? And they're like, Google. So they went to Google, and they're like, we need trusses. I'm like, great. And I'm like, where are you going to get those? And they said, oh. And then they came back and they said, we can buy them. And I said, well, how much are they? And they said, well, 2 metal trusses are $1,000 each. And I said, I don't have that kind of money. And then they came back and they said, we could get wood ones for $350. And I said, I still don't have that kind of money. And then they came back and they said, we saw plans and we can build them for $35 each. I said, yes, that's what you'll do. And so they solved their own problems. I kind of knew that they were going to, what they had to do, but it was what they learned from building a truss and figuring out the engineering that went behind it, and then actually having to figure out and then building it themselves was invaluable. I could have not set that up for them. There was no way that I could have created a lesson where they would have had to do that. They did it because they needed to, and they wanted to, and it was engaged, and they were engaged, and it was fun. And then this is their staircase to nowhere. A bit about the staircase to nowhere is that I told the kids that it would, if the staircase went someplace, it would be useful, and so then therefore it's craft. But since my class was called an art class, it had to be it had to be useless. So the staircases went no place. So it's more of a sculpture. But as you can see, the kids are pretty happy and smiling. Those aren't all the kids that worked on it, but they're all the kids that were in the class. And it was a great project that we thought out, but we had done the project ourselves first, and we let the kids, because we had done it ourselves first, and we were so sure of ourselves in our planning that we were really able to let the kids go out and do everything. I honest to God, I barely lifted a finger on this. I just bought, like 600 pieces of 2x4s, but I made them pick them out at Home Depot. They weren't really happy about that. Um, and then on to collaborating with a partner or colleagues. I honestly believe the best way to do project-based learning is with a colleague, with a partner, and to team teach. Team teaching gives you many different things. The most important thing is that the students get to learn to deal with two adults that are trying to get something done. Much like in the workplace, much like at home, there's always more than one boss. And if you think about it, think of all the bosses you have. Think of all the people that you need to get things done for. So it's really a great way for the students to learn those kinds of skills. And one of my favorite way to collaborate with other teachers is ping pong collaboration. And we did this project called Phys Newton several years ago, where the students illustrated Newtonian state physics standards. And in the physics class, they learned about universal gravitation. This one girl, Cherish, did it, and it was amazing. And so that's her teacher teaching her about universal gravitation, explaining the concepts. And each kid learned their own, but she took notes, and she came to me and she said, look, here's an illustration for a universal gravitation. And I said, those look like Hostess, coconut balls. And she's like, well, yeah, but it's about asteroids. And I said, well, I don't really know what an asteroid looks like. This to me doesn't show me anything about universal gravitation. Is there a way you could humanize it? And then so she came back, there's me saying, I don't get it, what are you trying to do? And then she came back with this analogy. Things that are smaller and further apart tend to stay apart, and things that are larger and closer together tend to stay together. And this is her concept of universal gravitation, where she used the physics from one class and then brought it into my art class, which is about humanizing and understanding ideas and visually expressing an idea. And she had this analogy that she created, and I think it's great. I even think the guy looked like me, but my wife didn't think the gal looked like her, but I thought it was funny. In that is a great way to collaborate. There's another way we collaborate too, and I call it peanut butter cup collaboration, where two great things are put together as one. And we did this project, Masters to Masters, and we integrated art and English, and they used theme, composition, and style. So they took the theme from a classical master from 400 BC to Manet, and then they looked from Monet to the present, and they did this art in the style of the modernist artists. And my teaching partner and I, she said, write a narrative for my class, and I said, make a painting for mine. And so the students took the integrated project, decided which two artists that the artist that she wanted to emulate, and then the artist that she wanted to paint like, and made a painting. And in the other class, she wrote, what would it be like if Klimt and Botticelli had met each other? And so at the end, she had this beautiful painting, a card that explained the Primavera, and then she wrote this kind of nice narrative, or not even a narrative, like a short story about Botticelli and Klimt meeting each other. And so she had to really research into what kind of people they were, what kind of interest it was. So it was, they did something in one class and they did something in another class and they put it together. planning out your collaboration is really important. What teacher's going to do which thing? And I've had a lot of tears personally because we didn't plan it out so well. I thought my teaching partner was going to do something, they thought I was going to do something, and we just missed. Um, Something, and this is my project-based learning 201 idea, I always say do the project yourself first. Well, really, you and your teaching partner need to do the project yourself first. You both have to understand what's relevant, what's worthwhile, and if it's fun, and also where the pitfalls are going to be. Each teacher needs to know how important the other teacher is to them to get this project done. So it's integral, and it's so important. And I can't believe that it took me 25 years to figure out, oh, I need to do the project myself first, and my teaching partner does. It's kind of funny, but you always keep learning, especially in project-based learning. And there we are with the student showing her book. Assessing project-based learning is different than assessing traditional learning, because you could just look at a quiz, you take the number. You look at a test, you take the number. You give points for an essay, you take the number. But assessing project-based learning is really looking at people and their progress that they're making. So a long time ago, I used to use a book for a receipt book for like a restaurant, and I would do check-ins with the students, and I would write down what they needed to do, what we decided they needed to do for the next Monday or Tuesday when we checked in, and I would sign it, they would sign it, and I would give them the receipt, and they would come back and we would check in to make sure the next week if they had done all the things that they said they were going to do, because that's the thing about project-based learning. You need to make sure that there's growth, and there's constant growth, and the students are constantly working. And there's the assessment. And it's not neat, it's not clean, but if you have to be interpersonal. You have to communicate with each other. Also, having deliverables. If deliverables are due, and so you're scaffolding it to the final project. And ideally, the deliverables will come together to make the final project, or the deliverables will be teaching the students to finally make the final product. So it's a pathway that they take, that it's a linear movement towards completing a task or completing a project or completing a presentation. So it's this idea of a linear path moving forward, and it's one that the students help design. And then, of course, critique. Critique is so important. You need to look at it. The students need to critique each other, and the teachers need to critique the students. It's one of the clearest ideas of asking somebody, like, see how yours looks different from theirs, and tell me why that's good, and tell me what about theirs can you get that you can put on yours so that will improve the project that you're doing. It really helps, because seeing what's visually seeing something, or visually watching something, or participating in something, helps people understand where they're at. Because we all have a lot of denial. I mean, we all have some kind of denial of something. And a lot of times when you're doing work, because it's hard, you're being judged, you're being assessed, you feel bad about it. But in a critique format, it's a safe space to really take a look at what you're doing, and how your learning is progressing. But that takes, maybe you need to have a scripted critique. Maybe you need to teach the kids how to critique each other. I know sometimes I've been hard on kids. I said, really, you haven't put a lot of work into it, and I think that you need to take a look at it and spend some more time on this particular aspect, and this aspect. And all the kid says is, Jeff yelled at me, and it's a painful thing, and it's something that I've as an artist, it's been painful for me, but it's every time I have critique, it's helped me. And so the teachers, the students, parents, and the community need to get used to giving critique in a positive, kind, but very specific way. And peer assessment, where the students look at each other's work and they talk about how they can do better work, and how and how they can help each other. One of my best examples is we did this mural in 2 weeks, and I had 26 girls. Actually, it was a 2-week intercession class, and they designed, and I had them in groups of 2 design a mural that they wanted to do, and we printed out our favorite 5, and then we chose our favorite 2, and we had those 4 girls mix their mural together so that it would be combining both. And you can see it's kind of photographic. It's also very painterly. And so we had, each student had to take 2 squares and they would make their own painting. And at the end of every day, we would hang the squares back up. And at some points, they would say, hey, that looks really cool that it's a different tone. And then sometimes they say, yeah, that looks cool that it's a good different tone there, but tomorrow, can you use this shade of blue instead of that shade of blue? Because I think it would really help if it matched better. And that critique was beautiful, and it was helpful, and everybody could see it. So think of looking at the picture as a whole, and then the individuals will then be able to critique each other. So peer critique and peer assessment is invaluable because they really listen to each other. And technology. Well, technology is a tool in a PBL classroom, and I think it helps the students communicate what they've learned, and it also helps them with what's out there now, like Photoshop and Grammarly. It really is like, it's really balancing the floor. It's giving people that maybe have some technical issues or haven't yet developed some certain skills, ability to communicate in a clear, understandable way. And the longer you spend time communicating your ideas, talking about what you're interested in and what you've learned, the more you will learn. So I've used technology since the beginning, and that was in the year 2000. I mean, I never had a computer in my classroom until I started working at High Tech High, and it's been so ubiquitous, it almost slipped my mind. But one of the biggest things that I do, and that's still up, if you go to jeffrobin.com, you can see all the projects and the work that I've done with my students for the last 17 years. It's all there, and it's really, it's great for them to see that, and it's also great for them to be able to show what they've learned. And teachers need technology, especially in this day and age, to be able to take all the deliverables in, to have all the ideas that the students need to find, because we're not the center of the classroom anymore. The world's the center of the classroom. And being able to aggregate it and find the videos to figure out what's next, technology is absolutely the key for that. And I remember they said in 95 when I was teaching, they said, wow, the computer's really going to change education, and people were so excited about it, and I was sitting there thinking, uh-oh, but it might not all be for the good. And it pretty much, I would say, it's been for the good, but it's something that we really have to think about, and we can't put our heads in the sand and say, I only want to use books in the classroom. Technology and computers has brought a certain amount of equity to voice and choice for our students, and I think using it and harnessing it and showing them how to use it well is really one of the soft skills that we need to teach in the 21st century. Jill? Here's Jill Davis, and she's going to talk about some ideas.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, very much for sharing your expertise with our audience today. And thank you to our audience for your participation. Before we start the Q&A with Jeff today, I did want to mention just a few ways that It's Learning supports project-based learning in K-12 classrooms. As Jeff mentioned, managing the PBL experience and all of the associated assets requires the right technology. So when teachers are using a single integrated learning management system or platform that requires just one login for things like content, curriculum, instruction, communication, and assessment, they can orchestrate all aspects of a project while freeing up their time to rotate among groups, work individually with students, and move about the classroom. And this also enables students to have a very rich learning experience and collaborate, create, and reflect in very innovative and productive ways. If you would like to learn more, visit itslearning.com. I will now hand things over to Annie for the Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Jill. You've heard a lot of information today from Jeff, and we have quite a few questions that have come in. So we'll go to the Q&A and take as many of these questions as we can. By the way, this webinar will be archived and available immediately following the end of this webinar today, and you'll be able to find that on the Tech and Learning website. So our first question comes from Gregg Keys. And Jeff, he wants to know, what was the aha moment for you that got you to switch? How could I guide my teachers there? And what helps capture your excitement and pass it along to students?
Well, the aha moment was I was teaching art history and AP art history, and I mean, I had everything. I had books. I was reading everything, and I've been going to every museum I could all over the world, and I was taking it so seriously, and my students were kind of taking the class to get a bump in their GPA, and at the end of the year I sat down and I looked at the AP test, and I was like, oh wow, you know, like I wanted to sit down and take it with the kids. I'm like, and I came home and I told my wife, I'm like, I would have crushed the test. I know so much about this stuff. And she looked at me and she's like, well, you know, you already went to college, you already got an MFA, it's not about you, it's about the kids. And I was like, oh, she got me. Like, it wasn't about me, it was about them. And I was kind of like lost. And so this is April, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I was doing art with the kids, and I was having fun, and then I realized that they were learning so much more by making art about art history than they did about even my, you know, like my funny and exciting lectures that I gave. They still were learning more when they were doing art about themselves. And just at that moment, I met a guy who was putting together a project-based learning school, and so I thought, yes. And so I was absolutely at the right time, at the right place at the right time. I think it's really critical to be an expert in your field, but it's also content knowledge is honestly about 10 or 20% of teaching. It's the 80% of excitement that you want to tell people about it, and you want to work with them so that they get the same love of it and you're able to communicate it with them. So I had that kind of ratio, and I realized, you know, I realized that people really learn better by doing. They learn better by setting, like I learned so much by putting together the talks, and I learned so much more than the kids did just by listening to them. So that was my aha moment.
Okay, great. Our next question comes from Shannon Carmody, and she asks, how do you recommend training and developing teachers in an intentional PBL design mindset?
I think it's the most important thing is to ask people, what do you like to do? What are you interested in? And to honor the fact that they are professionals, they are experts in their content area, and you have them go out and make something, do something. If they're a chemist, have them do a chemistry lab of their own design. Have them, if they're a writer, have them go out and, or if they're a historian or a history teacher, have them go out and do some history work. Have them look at something in the real world and then that's happening now and compare that to something that's happened in the past and write an article about it. Have them participate in their own subject areas so that artists are artists, physics teachers are physicists, and then ask them, what were all the steps that took you to get this piece of work done, and then have them do that with their students. It's kind of I mean, it sounds like oversimplification, but it really isn't. Do something, figure out what you did, have the students do those things and show their work. So it really comes down to, it's funny too, because when we started High Tech High, they had this idea of personalization, and I'm such a self-centered person that I thought, oh, it's about me. Like it'll be personalized for the teacher. And I was young, uh, and it really isn't. I mean, it really isn't that far off. If the teacher that's an expert in their field shows the students why they love their work, then they have the students do what they did, that will engage the students and that will have the teacher become successful. And I'm saying for them to do the work of a scientist, to do the work of as a writer, I'm not saying to be educated the way that they were educated, because of course we learned to tell time by building a watch in the 20th century. Now the kids can go out, learn to tell time, and then say, hey, you know how to build a watch? Well, hey, we'll show you. But it's doing something first will engage the people, will hook the students. And it's the same thing that hooked the teachers into getting into that field in the first place.
Great, great. Now, Susan Davies sends in the next question, which is, how many projects like the staircase one do you do for one school year?
I usually do two projects a semester, so one for first semester, one for second. But there's lots of different deliverables, and it's very scaffolded. But I like to do a project for the whole semester, so the students know where we're going, and they get drawn into it. And if it's the whole semester, they get the project done. Like first semester, we introduce it in the end of August. The students are doing their deliverables, there's editing, and then hopefully we get the project finished with a book page, because I like to make books for every project, by Thanksgiving. And then we send the book out to get published that next week, and then when we come back, we have time to talk about what the students have done. There's closure activities. We show the work to other student groups. We have time to critique, we have time to set up the exhibition, and nobody's in a rush to finish. And it's kind of like when I'm an artist and I show my work, and if I have a group show, I'll get the painting done a month ahead of time and put it in different rooms to make sure that it looks good, and maybe I'll change some things, and then I'll bring it into the gallery, and invariably there's somebody else that just finished the painting the night before, and you can smell the wet paint, and it looks like nobody's ever critiqued it. That's why you have to plan things out well. You want to get the project done way ahead of time. So having a whole semester is really great for that.
Good. Now, Laurie Van Greco asks, is peer critique and assessment all informal and spoken?
No. I would say that it's definitely, you write things down, because if you just say something to somebody, it's just usually not enough. And so I'll have the students, because everybody at the school I was at, everybody had a cell phone, and we used them as tools. We didn't, tell them they have to keep it in their pockets. So they would get on a group text, and if the kids that were critiquing each other, so there were 4 kids, and so that they would send each other kind, specific, and helpful critique, and so they would have it written down, and I would often go up to them and say, well, what did your critique partners say? And they said, oh, they said that this wasn't balanced and the math wasn't correct on this one problem. And I said, oh, okay, well, so did you fix it? And they would say, well, no. And I said, well, okay, why don't you do what they said? Or maybe even better, have them come over and help you fix that. And so writing it down is really critical. Because a lot of times when we hear critique, we only hear the good stuff, like, because I say kind, helpful, and specific, and then, people say, yeah, they thought it was great, but then you forget about the part that it's not on the topic, it's not what you're trying to do, and so you forget the bad things. But if you have it, or not the bad things, but the critical things, the things that are important for you to know, so I think it really does help to write things down as well.
Okay, great. Richard Davis says, it seems to me that PBL is easier to incorporate into some content areas than others. In which courses, say at High Tech High, has PBL been the most successfully employed, and in which has it been the most challenging to incorporate?
It's not the subject area, it's the teacher. It's the person that really knows their subject area and that it's excited about their subject area. So it's more about enthusiasm. I've seen Spanish teachers do awesome projects and where they really get the kids learning about the culture, learning to speak Spanish, learning to understand why it's important to speak another language, and they get right in there. And I've seen it not happen. I've seen Spanish teachers, have the kids conjugate verbs. It's not a fun way to learn Spanish. And so it really is up to the teacher, and it's how much the teacher's willing to invest of themselves and their creativity into the project. So I think I don't think there's anything that you couldn't teach project-based learning. Think about it. I mean, in the real world, all these subject areas exist, and it's done by on-the-job training. So physics, art, English, history, they're all things that happen in the real world, but they happen with people that are interested in doing it. So that's the trick. It's the interest, it's the enthusiasm. It isn't necessarily left up to the subject area.
Okay, Bob Fulbright asks, what PBL framework do you use?
I don't know what that means. Like framework as far as, yeah, I'm not sure what that.
Yeah, I would say, how do you make sure or plan things so that you're reaching some specific learning outcomes?
Oh, well, I think because I have a knowledge of, I have this broader knowledge of what the standards are in the state of California of not only my subject area but several subject areas. I'll get together with another teacher and we'll come up with, right now I'm doing this project and it's using AR to develop physics content for regular school teachers, people that aren't doing project-based learning but want to use some technology to kind of grab and hook the students into it. And we looked at the state physics standards. This is on the weekend. This is what I do on my weekends. I met with the AR guy and we got together to talk about the different things that we want to cover. So we do take a look at what the standards are, and then because we have confidence that if you get involved, if you start doing this project, you're going to be into it. So it's a certain amount of it's through playing and letting go. I have the confidence to know that the students are going to learn what they need to know. Is this good for brand new 22-year-old teachers that maybe don't know their subject area so well? Probably not, but it's something that mentoring and coaching would help. So I look at the standards, I work with people, I do the project myself first, and I say, is this worthwhile? So it's a very personal kind of idea. Yeah, there's no crystal ball for if that's the question.
Well, we're going to be out of time in just a few minutes, so we have time for, I think, one kind of big question for you, Jeff. What are some tips for establishing buy-in for PBL among colleagues, parents, and students?
Well, in education, in my experience, you can't force anything. You can't say, look, we're going to change everything. But the idea that people get to see the work the students have done, and it's this idea of putting the work out there, showing what can be done. So if two teachers get together and they do a project where the students, I was just in Providence, Rhode Island, and I saw these two teachers that are doing this great thing where the kids are developing products, and with in their building class, and then in the business class, they're figuring out where they're going to market them. And when other students see this, they say, wow, that's really cool. So if it's up on the wall, or if it's at the student store, or if it's down the street at the hardware store and they're selling things that were developed at the middle school, they say, oh, that's really cool. So parents see that, students see that, and other teachers see the excitement of it. They see the success of it. So really, truly, the only way that I've seen project-based learning and the idea of it grow successful is through word of mouth. But you need to make what happens in the classroom transparent. And that's why technology is so great. You know, there's Twitter, there's websites, there's Facebook, there's getting people, you know, like there's, I can't, God, there's so many places. There's, you know, um, GoFundMe and things like that, where people get to see what's happening in the classroom. So if you can take the wall down between the classroom and the hallway and the school, people will get excited. And so that's what you have to do. But it's nothing that you can stand up and mandate that everybody does. They'll see it, and they'll see that it makes sense. And it's a lot of work. I'm not going to kid around. It's hard to do, but anybody can teach project-based learning in their classroom. Anybody can change the way that they teach, and you don't need to start a whole school for it. It's just a different way of teaching, and it's more about student-centered learning. It's more about student choice, and it's more authentic, so that it tries to get everyone in the classroom, not just the kids that are predisposed. So make your work public, and people will be drawn to it.
Great. Well, I think we have time for one more quick question, and this comes from Theodora Douglas. The examples you've given are amazing. My question is, where do you secure funding to provide supplies and supplemental materials for the projects? You just mentioned GoFundMe. That would be one place.
GoFundMe is a great place. Also, I kind of do the John Dillinger approach. They asked John Dillinger, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. I go to people in the community that have a lot of money, and I show them the work that I've done or the work that I'm planning on doing, and I ask them for money. Because, I mean, teaching's a full-time job plus. I don't really have the time to nickel and dime, so I'll just go to foundations, I'll go to individuals and say, hey, look, you know, check out the work we did last semester. This is what we want to do this next semester. And to a teacher, writing a check for $4,000 to buy 800 pieces of 2x4s is a lot of money. But to a person that has money, the person that's part of the community, it's not really that big of an ask. And I think looking for grants, GoFundMe, and going out and asking for money. It's painful when people say no, but you know what? It's fundraising sounds like this: no, 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 yes. So, and then you have your money. So it's go out and ask for it.
Well, Jeff, I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for sharing your stories with us today. It makes me really want to go back to school and sign up for your class. So, and I'd like to remind everyone again that you can find this webinar on the Tech and Learning website, and just later this afternoon. Before you leave, be sure to check out the two handouts that we have for you. That is the slide deck of Jeff's presentation, as well as a project-based learning decision guide for engaging students, and that is from our sponsor, It's Learning. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I hope that you'll join us for future Tech and Learning webinars. Thank you and goodbye.